We will be starting Unit 2, and this will be our first time doing video notes. So with video notes, you're still going to be writing down the 3 most important facts on a slide. You will also still be doing your summaries. I'll be collecting your notes at the end of the unit right before we take our test. Today we'll be looking at Unit 2, Notes Number 1, Industrial America. So with Unit 2, we are picking up right where we left off. The Civil War is over, and so our country is still continuing to grow. There are changes that have to be addressed, and Americans began to think ahead. There's opportunity to make money in post-war markets. War vets and freed slaves began to move west, expanding our country more, discovering new uncharted areas. New states, new territories, new cities become part of our country, and new ideas are created and shared across America. This leads us to the time of American industrialization. So industrialization refers to the period from about 1850 to 1920. So the actual part of industrialization does start before Civil War, but during the Civil War, all that has to be put to a stop in order to allow the war to happen because the country is so focused on the war. And then after the war, we begin to see industrialization happening again. So a period from about 1850 to 1920 where American inventions, natural resources, and an urban workforce fueled an explosion of U.S. economic dominance. Some of the key fundamental components of this era: we see American inventions begin to make life easier, hiking productivity. So instead of doing things by hand, machines are created to help out with this work, whether it's machines in factories, machines helping out in agriculture and farms. Farmers and urban workers began to produce goods in mass quantities, helping to make things more affordable. Railroads also begin to connect our country and our market, so you can send goods from place to place, people can travel more efficiently, and businesses expanded America's role in the world economy. In order for the process of industrialization to happen, inventions were key. So we see oil drilling becoming big. Edwin L. Drake introduces the use of steam power to oil drills and rigs. We see the oil boom taking off, and prospects are bought for oil-rich land. So oil becomes a huge commodity because oil can then be transferred and can be used to create other resources like kerosene, fuel for light, gasoline, fuel for automobiles. And so finding oil, having oil as this resource to be used in conjunction with factories becomes huge during industrialization. Finding oil in places like Texas and all across our country makes people very wealthy, makes people want to go out and find this resource. Oil becomes such a huge commodity, it's often referred to as black gold. The Bessemer steel process. So this was a process that removed carbon from iron ore to produce steel. Steel was a lighter and more durable than iron, but it was just as strong. So you would take iron ore, a natural resource that would be found from the ground, use the Bessemer steel process to create steel. So then steel would be used in buildings, in factories, to create machinery, to create taller, stronger buildings, allowing for cities to grow up. So being able to transform iron into steel was a huge, huge process. We began to see these inventions improving life. Several inventions instantly improved the quality of life for Americans, such as Thomas Edison's incandescent light bulb. It harnessed electricity in a light bulb and produced light by running it through a filament. It took Edison many thousands of tries to create this light bulb. And so when the light bulb was initially created, electricity was not as vastly accessible as it is today. So it was both the process of, yes, we have this light bulb, but now we also have to introduce electricity into our cities and our homes to make it affordable and functional. So Edison later helped invent a system for harnessing and distributing electricity over distances. But the fact that cities could have light, once the sun went down, people would use candlelight, you'd have street lamps, but the amount of light that those would provide was not as vast as with electricity. So having access to electricity can really transform the fact that work can be done at night. You could still people can still live their life during the nighttime versus having everything completely shut down. Alexander Graham Bell's telephone was also a huge invention, creating a network for communication, connecting one household to another, business to businesses. So we begin to see information being shared at a much faster rate. And so this laid the groundwork for worldwide, coast-to-coast telecommunication network. So effects on life. So we have all of these great inventions. They're helping to make our life easier. The incandescent light bulb helped to make electricity safer and cheaper because it was needed across the city. It led to other types of inventions that required electricity, like appliances, so small kitchen appliances like a toaster oven, a refrigerator, a coffee maker, washer dryer. It was used in electrical travel. In some cities, you still have streetcars or trams that utilize electricity to power them, and it began to spread across the cities. Factories were also being built everywhere to utilize electricity, help to run their machinery. The typewriter was a huge invention, helped to make work more efficient, open up job opportunities for women. So most men did not want to work as a secretary. So high school educated, college educated women could find these office jobs that required their knowledge of grammar, spelling, how to construct, memos and such. And so it made for a different type of working environment versus working in factories. So tend to see more middle class women applying for these office type jobs. The telephone also created white collar office jobs for women as secretaries or telephone operators. And so with the picture on the bottom, you see a whole row of telephone operators. So the first phones, if you notice the woman on top, there's no buttons, there's no dial. She would have to pick up the phone, talk to an operator, and ask to be connected to whoever it was she wanted to speak with. And so the operators would have to manually connect her line to another line. And so for the longest time, you'd have operators that made the telephone lines function. Without an operator, calls could not go through. As technology grew and you were able to add, buttons on the phone, a dial, the need for operators went away. Lastly, today we're going to be looking at railroads and how they connected our country, some changes that they began to influence in our regular life. So Connecting America, the age of railroads. So the national network. So this would be our first time that our country would be connected from coast to coast. Railroads were fueled by steel, coal, steam. The locomotive spans every corner of the United States. So I want you to start to see that we need resources like steel, like coal, in order to allow for these inventions to happen. So in order for railroads to even be a possibility, we need to have access to steel, to coal, to steam, whatever's going to power the railroad. So the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869. A golden spike was nailed at Promontory, Utah to connect the East and West. It was laid primarily by Civil War vets, Chinese immigrants, and freed slaves who were looking for work, wanted to make money, and weren't afraid of the hard, labor-intensive work. And this was the first time that the U.S. was linked. So you had railroads that were being built from the east heading west, railroads starting from the west that were heading east, and they met in the middle in Utah, and that was the first line that was connected. So now that you had a vast network of railroads, time schedules had to be developed when a train is leaving from one city heading to another. But this was an era before time zones, so having this need to have a schedule and have people know what time they would be arriving their destination created a need for us to develop time zones. So we see 24 time zones created to keep the schedule across our world, and the U.S. was divided into 4 different time zones. You have Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific. So some of the effects on railroad. It did help to open up the vast West, made it easier for people to move out west to start new lives, to find new jobs, help businesses and farmers distribute their goods, sell what they are creating. So we see new towns and markets popping up along railroad lines because where trains stop, you have stations. People are going to want to maybe spend the night. So you have hotels. They want to eat, grab something to eat while they're waiting, restaurants. Maybe they stop to set up their lives there. So you have general stores. So you begin to see new towns springing up all across railroad lines. People traveled west to open lands, restart their lives, exchange goods. Cities and markets popped up all along main lines. Pullman, so an example of all of this was with George Pullman. He's a railroad magnate. He owned the railroad company. And so people that worked for him often worked and lived in his company town. There he would provide them housing, there'd be shops, hospitals. However, things were often more expensive in the company town, so he would control what prices were set at. Oftentimes, charging more to make money off of his workers, knowing that they did not have other options. So once the workers began to kind of take note of this, they wanted to unionize, come together. They began to strike for better treatment, better pay. And so ultimately, this concept of a company town failed because of the strike, because the workers did not like it. Later in this unit, we'll talk more about workers coming together to form unions and demand better pay, higher wages, better treatment for themselves. So this is the end of our notes. We're just starting to look at industrialization. You want to make sure you finish up your summary, look through your new key terms, see what key terms that may have been covered in today's notes.